Thank you for that brief recess. We just had a few technical difficulties. Continuing on, this meeting of the Disaster Recovery International Affairs and Planning Committee of the Maui County Council is located on the traditional Aina of Kanaka Oiwi, who never ceded their sovereignty to the with us. Deputy Corporation Counsel Mike Hopper, Deputy Director of Transportation Diane Yogi, Executive Assistant to the Office of Recovery Jordan Hart. Mr. Smith's not here, yeah. Okay. And from the Department of Environmental Management, Director Shana Gawa, Director of Public Works Jordan Molina, Fire Captain Oliver Voss, Planning Director Kate Blystone, and Administrative Planning Officer Greg Post. Our other resources are Stefan Pellegrini, Principal Opticos Design Inc., and that's for DRIP 9/1. Members, without objection, I will designate Mr. Pellegrini as a resource person under Rule 18A of the Rules of the Council due to his knowledge and expertise as an architect, urban designer, and planner.
No objections.
Our committee staff for today, we have Senior Committee Secretary Yvette Boutillier, Legislative Analysts Jarrett Pasquale and Keone Hurdle, Assistant Clerk Jean Pokipala, and Legislative Attorney Carla Nakata. On our agenda for today, we have DRIP 9, a presentation on missing middle housing. DRIP 2 and 3, we will take together. DRIP 2 is Bill 103, amending Chapter 19.08 Maui County Code relating to density within residential districts, and DRIP 3, Bill 104, 2024, amending Chapters 19.04, 19.08, and 19.29 Maui County Code relating to kitchens, kitchenettes, and wet bars, and Section 19.36B.020 Maui County Code to add parking requirements for dwelling units with kitchenettes. We will take testimony after opening remarks or presentations. So moving on to DRIP 9/1, missing middle housing. Under Rule 7B of the Rules of the Council, the committee intends to receive a presentation on missing middle housing from Stefan Pellegrini relating to missing middle housing, a term referring to a range of house scale building types with multiple units in walkable neighborhoods. The committee may also discuss other related matters. However, no legislative action will be taken on this item. So it was requested, this presentation would have been referred to the Housing and Land Use Committee, but thankful to Member Kama to let the presentation be scheduled in this committee ahead of Bill 103 and 104 to kind of explain how 103 and 104 could look here in Maui. The Planning Department presented this during the Maui Planning Commission meeting of February 25th, 2025. And missing middle housing refers to a range of multifamily housing types that are compatible in scale with single-family walkable neighborhoods. 3 additional documents, like in addition to the presentation, were provided by Opticos Design, which you can review on Granicus. Attachment number 2 is an executive summary on missing middle housing study. Attachment number 4 is the final memorandum on the missing middle housing study for Central, South, and West Maui. This is the first report in the study that describes the analysis used to identify missing middle housing ready areas. And attachment 3 is the final report on the missing middle housing study, which goes into greater depth to assess potential housing types that could fit on typical lot sizes in Maui. At this time, we will receive opening comments and presentation from Mr. Stefan Pellegrini. of Opticos Design.
Thank you, Chair Pelton, and thank you everyone for giving me this opportunity to speak with you today. I'm going to do a brief presentation overview of the materials that were in your packet, and I look forward to a conversation with you on this topic. I'm going to share my screen just one moment. And through the chair, I'd like to verify that you can see my screen that I'm sharing.
We sure can. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. So this is what I'm going to try to cover today. This should just be a brief overview of about 10 to 15 minutes. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the work that we prepared on behalf of the Hawaii Community Foundation. I'll introduce you to the missing middle housing concept and talk about this work as it is relevant to Central South and West Maui. As Chair Pelton mentioned, we prepared a two-part study to provide recommendations on where and how Maui could expand housing choice and affordability. The first piece of this was what we refer to as a SCAN, which is a report that identifies different places in the community that are suitable for missing middle housing and provides an introduction to some of the zoning and policy levers which can be shifted to provide more MMH. And then the second report we refer to as a deep dive, which provides a little bit more information about typical situations where missing middle housing can be located, the feasibility of those kinds of projects, and then a deeper dive on zoning and policy recommendations. As Chair Pelton mentioned, when we use this term, MMH, we refer to house-scale buildings with multiple units in walkable neighborhoods. We call it missing because this middle scale that's between single-family homes and larger, more intense mixed-use commercial and multifamily buildings are often absent from many communities today, although many cities and counties, communities all over the United States were built with these kinds of housing types in their neighborhoods for many years, but more recently they have been absent. And we use this term middle, both to talk about that middle scale, but also to refer to the middle-class households that this kind of housing can support. And so we are looking not only at housing types that can provide sort of a neighborhood style of living, but also housing types that can be sold or rented at an attainable cost, and provide sort of a broader number of housing choices in our communities. This is sort of part of what we refer to as the barbell of affordable housing. And there's a lot of different ways that we can sort of expand housing choice and availability in communities. On one hand, we can subsidize housing through programs like low-income tax credits. This is really good at providing housing for low and very low incomes. At the other end of the spectrum, we can actually build market rate housing, which tends to be in more intense buildings. That does a lot to increase the supply, but because these buildings are typically complicated and expensive to build, they tend to serve only the upper tiers of the market. And so we're left with something in the middle that we try to actually reach that can be lower cost by design, and also continue to provide, as I mentioned, these neighborhood-styled living choices for families. The characteristics of missing middle include, as I mentioned, smaller, well-designed, house-scaled buildings. We try to sort of maintain private and shared open spaces to sort of maintain that neighborhood living. We also look for places in the community where housing can go, where people can actually be a little bit less car dependent. And so we're looking primarily at places in communities where there is some degree of connectivity and walkability, not to eliminate car use, but to find where there are sort of opportunities to reduce or become less dependent on automobiles. I mentioned that this is missing. There are local examples. These are photos that include places that many of you may recognize on Maui, as well as some missing middle housing types found on the neighboring island of Kauai. I mentioned that this has to do with housing attainability. As all of you are aware, there are some very extreme housing affordability issues on Maui, and very little land in the county is actually zoned for multifamily housing. And so we have a lot of constraints, both from land availability and also sort of the prices. The way that this sort of is reflected are high home costs, high rents, and very large percentage of families who we refer to as house burdened. That means that they pay more than 30% of their total household income on their monthly rent. These numbers below, I believe, the recent UHERO report has actually revised this number at the bottom down to 20%. Only 20% of Maui households can now afford a mortgage on a medium-priced single-family home. So in order to sort of do this work, we started by looking at different geographies in West Central and South Maui. We looked at both natural constraints. We studied very carefully the work that county planning and others had done, starting with the island plan, also down to the community plans. And we looked at the all the communities on the island to understand the sort of connectivity and the pattern of where local services and amenities are. And what we found is that there's sort of a variety of different centers in the community that are mixed use in character that can support different types of housing in and around these centers. We refer to these in the reports as missing middle ready areas, and we're looking primarily at a 5 to 10 minute walk radius around these centers. Again, to try to sort of understand where there are opportunities to locate housing in places where we can get people close to services and the convenience of local amenities. Many of these are places that you might be familiar with. On Maui, they are both sort of more intense places that you might find in Kahului or Wailuku, but also in many of the sort of the historic neighborhood centers that you find in different communities upcountry and on the south side, different places on the island. We compiled these missing middle ready areas into a series of maps, which you'll find in the reports. And these represent sort of the geographies that we looked at to understand where and how these opportunities could exist. We then looked for sort of repeating patterns, and what we found is that there were 6 residential zones that were most prevalent in these areas. Those are R1, R2, and R3, also A1, B2, and WRA. And so we looked at those 6 with a little bit more attention to detail to understand what could fit there and what sort of opportunities there might be to recommend changes to allow more housing to occur in those areas. Here are the missing middle ready areas on West Maui and in the upcountry for reference. When we did this additional sort of test fit work I mentioned on these 6 zones, we looked at a variety of lots that we saw were actually repeating in the community, so that we knew that if we analyzed a situation in one location, that it actually would have meaning and relevance across lots of different geographies on the island. We tested these for what would fit on a lot, thinking about sort of the different principles that I shared earlier, but we also tested them for financial feasibility to try to understand if developers could actually produce market rate housing that actually could result in attainable units for sale or for rent. And through this analysis, there were sort of repeating findings that we found. We found that in order to improve on feasibility and attainability, there were levers, particularly on the zoning side, that could be shifted that would help make projects more feasible and more likely to deliver, as I mentioned, attainable units that would be available to a median range of incomes. 4 of those are listed here. You can see 2 of those that have to do with density and reducing parking requirements are relevant to development standards in the zoning ordinance. We found that these are levers. When they can be shifted, we can actually increase the feasibility and attainability of housing projects. I'm going to take you through a few of these examples, and the purpose of these is just to get a sense, again, of what fits, but also sort of provide some guidance on the form and character of missing middle housing, thinking about actually sort of how it might be compatible with the neighborhoods where it actually could be introduced. This first one is typical residential lots in Kihei. You can see it's 75 by 100 feet. And this is an example of what we learned could fit here. This is a 5-unit project that would incorporate a triplex building and 2 ADUs. You can see it actually can also incorporate shared and common open space, and we can achieve a 1 space per unit off-street parking ratio in addition for this type. You all sort of speak about density and square footage per unit. And so to kind of give a reference here, this kind of project would provide upwards of 29 dwelling units to the acre that actually translates to about 1,500 square feet per residential unit. This is another sort of illustration that shows how that kind of project might fit into a residential neighborhood. You can see sort of the 1 to 2 story character and the detached buildings, which would be sort of designed to accommodate sort of that neighborhood compatibility that we talked about earlier. Here's the second one in Central Kahului. This is sort of an example of how a larger infill site could deliver a missing middle housing neighborhood. This is a larger site, just under 17 acres. Many of you are probably familiar with the site in the B2 zone. We looked at this sort of for understanding what could be achieved with missing middle housing types, and we found that this could accommodate about 455 units. Again, providing sort of substantial open space, neighborhood living, and retaining that off-street parking ratio that we discussed earlier. This translates to about 27 dwelling units to the acre, which again is about 1,500 square feet per residential unit. This gives an example of sort of the form and scale that we can see on larger projects. We actually could incorporate large community open spaces and shared open spaces into this kind of neighborhood scheme. I mentioned a little bit previously about zoning barriers. This slide provides sort of a summary of some of the repeating elements that we found when we looked at these zones, where there were levers that actually could be pushed or pulled that would enhance or increase, as I mentioned, the possibility or potential for these projects to actually be developed. You can see that density is a sort of fairly consistent barrier to missing middle. We also looked closely at lot size, lot coverage, and setbacks. You can see that this sort of provides a roadmap for things that might be considered now, but also in the future as you all work to continue to amend and update your Title 19, that there might be some additional opportunities to consider some of these levers to allow additional missing middle housing in your communities. And this is just sort of an example of how this plays out. We know that the existing lot size base density limits in the R zones, for example, are resulting in densities of generally between 4 and 7 dwelling units to the acre. That's between sort of 6 and 10,000 square feet per unit. And you can see that if we look at this from the standpoint of what can fit with these types of buildings and these types of sort of neighborhood-oriented projects, we can see that we can achieve densities upwards of 20 to 30 dwelling units to the acre. An interesting point I want to make here that this actually is maintaining the lot coverage and open space requirements in the R zones. That wasn't sort of a lever that needed to be pushed or pulled in reaching this kind of missing middle housing output on these parcels. So the reports actually provide and include an implementation summary. There are emerging topics that it starts to discuss and provide some guidance for actually what could happen next. These include policy and zoning levers, as I mentioned, but also recommendations for streamlining the application review and entitlement process. There's also opportunities to think about changes to the building code that many communities across the United States are considering to or have actually already achieved in order to actually make some of these possible. There's ongoing discussions about coordinating efforts of infill with infrastructure investments in the community. And also discussions around funding, financing, and ways that this kind of development can be incentivized for local developers. We had an opportunity through the process to start a conversation with the community with an open house that was held earlier this year. We would look for sort of additional opportunities to continue this conversation, looking for opportunities in the community, but also continuing to discuss both concerns, issues, and what people might like about this kind of proposal. And the report in conclusion also outlines some sort of more detailed next steps that could be happening down the road. These include sort of consideration of pilot projects, but also thoughts about how more robust changes to Title 19 could be included in the longer term. Those could include overlay zones or floating zones, ways that folks could be incentivized to introduce these kinds of projects in these neighborhood contexts, as well as sort of additional recommendations for partnerships and implementation projects that could be considered down the road. So I want to thank all of you for this time today. I know our time is short, but I look forward to additional questions and conversation on this topic. As I mentioned, that this rollout actually started with the community back in December. We had a chance to talk with the Planning Commission earlier in February. We recommend that all of you take a look at the documents that were provided and invite you to visit the House Maui website to download copies of the reports and the executive summary. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Any opening comments from planning or fire and public safety? Go ahead, Director Blystone.
Well, hello. Thank you to the committee for listening to this today. This all started back when I was with Hawaii Community Foundation, and we knew we needed to understand why these missing middle projects weren't happening through the House Maui initiative. And so we literally hired the guys that wrote the book on missing middle housing, Opticos Design.
Tightness, I forgot my keys in my house and couldn't get here. Had to call somebody for the keys so I can get here. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you for persevering. Okay, and any opening remarks from Captain Voss on the presentation?
Yeah, just trying to make my camera and mic work. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you and see you.
I did participate in this presentation once before at the invitation of Kate, and we support that kind of development because inherently those buildings have a lot of the fire protection requirements that are associated with that. So when we get into building structures of 3 or more internal dwellings, there's a lot of protection requirements that come along with that wouldn't require any further revisions. So I like what the direction we're going, and I want to be kept up on any more information on that, and we definitely support the middle housing. Thank you for sharing that presentation.
Thank you. At this time, we will now move on to public testimony for missing middle housing, which is DRIP 9 per N1. Written testimony is encouraged and can be submitted via the e-comment link at mauicounty.us/agendas. Testifiers wanting to provide oral testimony should join the online meeting via the Microsoft Teams link printed on today's agenda, or call into the phone number, which is, if you do not wish to testify, you can view the meeting on Akaku, Channel 53, Facebook Live, or mauicounty.us/agendas. At this time, we will call on testifiers wishing to testify on DRIP 9 per N1. Staff, can you please call the first testifier?
Yes, Chair. First up to testify, we have Mr. Tom Crowley on Teams.
Aloha, Mr. Crowley. We're ready for your testimony.
Thank you. I saw this presentation at the Planning Commission, and I appreciate seeing it again. In between that time, I took the opportunity to drive by one of the example lots that was given in Kihei and tried to imagine what was proposed, a triplex plus 2 accessory dwellings and only 1 parking space for each of those dwelling units. I looked at the parking that was already taking up most of the street, and I could not even imagine if a new owner of this lot came into that neighborhood and said, I'm going to build, 5 dwellings on this property. What do the neighbors feel about it? It just, in that particular case, would not work. I don't believe that Maui has too many opportunities to be walkable in our existing communities. While this particular example was just off of South Kihei Road, there is little to no chance that someone's going to live there without a car and walk to the grocery store and walk to their job or whatever the case may be. So while I don't want to throw water on this whole idea, I think the idea is fine, but I think shoehorning some of these ideas into the existing neighborhoods is really not going to work, certainly not to the extent that it was just proposed there. And I gave you guys this same kind of warning before. If you allow condominiumization of these units, which it kind of sounded like that was part of this proposal, was that we could make less expensive units that people could live in, do recognize they will be snapped up by people who want a second home on Maui. You have failed to stop that in the apartment district. Everything built in the apartment district since 1991 has had the requirement, must be used for long-term residential housing. I dare you guys to just look up how the units in the apartment district that have been built since 1991 in places like Kihei and West Maui are actually being used. If you do, as I have, you'll find that more than 50% of them are second homes. They're not used for vacation rental. They are used exclusively as second homes. And I do believe that that is one of the problems here with, if you allow these smaller units to be built, if they're rentals for the owner, fine. But if they're going to be available for sale via condominiumization, you are really creating more opportunities for second homes. That's, on this subject, that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley, for your testimony. Questions for the testifier, Member Sugimura?
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate you taking that extra effort to check it out, and you're making me think that they're subject to short-term vacation rental situations, even if we want it to be long-term. Is that what we're
Not
opening
short-term
up?
rental, just to be clear. Not someone buying it to use in any way, shape, or form for short-term rental. Someone buying it to use for their own use a portion of the year, which is how most of apartments built in the apartment district since 1991 are being used, not as short-term rentals. They don't rent them out to people on a weekly basis or a monthly basis or anything like that. The owners use them, their families use them, their friends use them, but they are strictly second homes.
Okay. I'm understanding a new tax you're talking about, so thank you, Mr. Cohen.
Member Lee?
Well, hi, Tom. So now we know the disadvantages. Are there any advantages to this type of housing?
Well, I certainly like the increase in density, and we're going to talk about it more in the next two items as to how we might be able to increase density. I just didn't like the particular example that was made of a triplex plus 2 accessory dwellings, 5 dwellings, and then saying, well, we can fit all these, but we only need to put 5 parking spaces on there. No, you need 10 parking spaces if you're going to put 5 dwellings on a property. And even with 10 parking spaces, I can guarantee there's going to be people parking in the street. So I do believe that we can consider density, but something like this, with the whole basic proposal, it kind of works if you're creating a community from the ground up, an existing community where you're going to know exactly where you're going to place your business, so forth. But trying to retrofit our current communities for this, I really don't see it fitting in too many places, at least not the ones I'm familiar with.
Okay, thank you.
Member Cook?
Member Johnson had his hand up first and then me.
Oh, Member Johnson?
Okay, all right, fine. I don't mind waiting, but Mr. Crowley, clarifying question. You know, I hear your conversation on condominiumization, and you're absolutely right. Those apartments have been going to second homeowners across the nation. But if we're talking about my lot or your lot, and you wanted to put an Ohana on your lot, it's really up to you as the owner. If you're going to sell to a mainland person, you might be having sons or daughters or aunties or uncles or grandmas you could sell that within your family, right? It's a bit of a free market kind of angle too. It's really up to the person who owns their lot, if they do condominiumize, who they will sell it to. Am I correct?
Certainly, but I mean, we kind of know how condominiumization has worked out, say, in Laniapoco. Okay, so when you make a rule like this, and you say people can condominiumize, people are going to do that. Many people are going to do that for what the most return on their investment is going to be. But in the example that you made, if some family owns a lot, like I own my lot here, and I want to build an Ohana, and my family member is going to live in the Ohana, I could work out a situation internally that he owns it, but it's not recorded as a deed, I suppose, you know. But as soon as you open the door up to splitting these larger lots up into smaller lots, hoping you're going to make housing for local people, I just have a feeling that more than half of them are not going to be for local people. They're going to end up being something different.
I understand that, and of course, hopefully legislation can address that. But I think, you know, the stats that they showed, and I'm sure you are, Mr. Crowley, that folks are really struggling to pay the mortgage, right? There's a term for that, and we're just struggling that everything above 30% of our income is going towards mortgage. We all know people 50% going towards their mortgage. I think that condominium, I don't want to get into debate here, of course, I'm just trying, but, you know, the idea that there are sections of our community that are really hurting to pay the mortgage, and condominiumization could help them shrink their mortgage, shrink their responsibilities, and able to live in those homes. So, for clarifying, what say you?
Well, let's figure out what you said legislation could address this. Let's figure out what legislation would need to come forward in order to prevent what I just laid out for you. Mm-hmm. You guys heard testifiers from the folks in Kihei that bought affordables recently, and they said their mortgage payment was $5,000, $7,000. Right. And those were duplex, little tiny units, 900 square feet. And again, while we think we're creating a $300,000 home that someone could afford here, I can picture us creating luxury little dwellings, that each of those becomes $1 million thing, unless you have a way out of that, So it's just a precaution that I'm saying you better take, or we're going to see neighborhoods turn into something different than what you intend.
Thank you for that, Chair. Or thank you, Chair.
Member Cook?
Thank you, Chair. My clarifying question for Mr. Crowley. Do you,
you know, edge to edge and are 2 stories high and probably have 4 or 5 units in them already. So yes, I kind of see that that's already happening there. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think those would be snapped up by second homeowners. You know, you don't have a lot of second homeowners who are looking in Kahului to buy places. But I'm cautioning you that in Kihei, you certainly do. And in West Maui. So yes, there may be places where this could fit better, this kind of redevelopment idea could fit better. But if it goes across the whole island and we apply it to all R1, R2, R3 zoning, wow, I think you're going to get something different than what we might want.
thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair.
Any more questions for the testifier? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Can you please call the next testifier?
Chair, I believe Mr. J.C. Law was approaching the podium.
Okay, did he sign up? Okay.
Thank you, Kano. Thank you, Mr. Crowley. Thank you for wearing that old T-shirt. It takes some of the pressure off. Thank you, Luna Ho'omalu Paulton, for letting me testify without duress. Aloha kako, everybody. Oval JC Law, I'll try to keep it relevant. I would like to improve my neighborhood, so mahalo to the guests for the presentations. The words walkable neighborhoods caught my attention because if I send my neighbor a note or letter, it takes 3 days, but it takes me less than 3 minutes to walk to their hale. And if my neighbor is a council member, I'm worried after yesterday's great committee meeting, it might even be a crime to mail them a birthday card.
Questions for the testifier? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Any further testifiers?
Chair, that's all the individuals signed up to testify. We could do last call.
Sure.
If there's anyone else in the audience or on Teams who would like to testify, please come up to the mic and begin your testimony, or use the raise your hand function on Teams and staff will unmute you. I'll provide a brief countdown. 3, 2, 1. Seeing none, Chair, no one has indicated that they wish to testify.
Members, any objection to closing public testimony on this item?
No objections.
Okay, public testimony is closed, accepting any written testimony into the record. For this item, since we have 2 bills, we can start off with 1 round of 3-minute questions. Is Mr. Stefan available for questions?
Chair, he indicated that he was going to be able to dial back in. He had to, I think it's 5:15 over there, so he had to do something with his kids, I believe. So hopefully he's back.
Okay. And then if not, can members direct their questions to you?
I can do my best.
Okay, let's try one round of 3-minute questions. We'll start with Committee Vice Chair Nohe Hodgins.
Thank you, Chair. While our presenter is no longer here, that was a really informative presentation, so thank you, and thank you guys. While it wasn't presented, it wasn't Organicus, but it basically says these types are not new and we just stopped building them. I'm wondering if you can tell us why, and then I'm wondering if we could discuss some of the barriers to getting it rebuilt. But if you could answer why and then discuss some of the barriers, I would appreciate it.
So I wish Stefan was here because he studied this question across the country, right? And so he has a deeper understanding of it. But my understanding is that zoning has kind of changed over time. That, you know, some of these things sprung up organically and were just happened absent zoning, right? That was just the most logical way to build shared walls and making best use of the space, maximum use of the space. Over time, we decided that we needed setbacks and we needed, to separate uses more. There was an an energy push towards everyone having a single family home. So a lot of the energy was pushed towards doing that and building these large subdivisions with single family homes. And so these other things just kind of fell to the wayside, and then the bias started creeping in towards single family energy in our zoning codes. And so that's why now with these setbacks and with all the various things that are happening, it's just, that's part of the reason. I think another reason is that there is, Captain Voss mentioned, there's some building code issues that come when you add additional units to things, and that it's not my area of expertise, so I'm not going to be able to talk articulately about that, but that's another piece of it. So the cost prohibitiveness of some of these projects. So what we can handle in the planning department is the zoning code. And so you asked about some of those barriers, and I'm trying to remember the slide exactly. I don't have it in front of me right now, but some of the barriers were the minimum lot size or the maximum coverage, and then parking, and just the overall density and setbacks, right? So we can control all of those things within the zoning code. I think it's worth talking about parking a little bit. I don't think Mr. Crawley's wrong in his comments that we have become a very car-centric island. But if we are to survive into the future and house our people, we're going to have to think about other ways to move people around. So I'm glad to hear that Deputy Director of Transportation is here to talk about some of that as well, if you have those questions.
Sure. The bias for single family homes, that's our want to create only single family homes, and we stopped creating this missing middle. And I find it interesting because I obviously grew up in a single family home, but I grew up in a walkable town, a town that we don't build anymore. But that's, for Makwa and Paya, that's exactly what it was like. People lived upstairs and worked downstairs.
Yep.
And that was my version of normal, which wasn't even too long ago, and definitely my grandma's version of normal. So I guess we got to redefine our new normal.
Yep. Thank you.
Member Cook?
Thank you, Chair. So for the planning director, the industrial properties are pretty much less per square foot to build than a lot of residential properties, and they have firewalls and they have higher and the various things. So I guess part of this is an opinion, and I'd like you to give me some feedback. I think that if we had ground floor parking, firewalls, and if we design these buildings and we embrace these buildings, they can be done cost effectively to have residential mixed-use construction density on lots that meet the fire code. The only thing as a builder, the way that you make them cost effective is that you do it in quantity. You have a certain repetitiveness to it without making them boring and ugly, and it become the standard and the norm. The reason we use 2x4s, California platform framing for residential construction is because everybody knows how to do it. The supply chain is getting prohibitively expensive. So anyway, do you foresee a barrier to raising the height so that you could have ground floor parking in a 3-story structure and it be, quote, meet this middle thing?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. I also want to add to something else that you said. So I won't forget to add. I think the trick with ground floor parking is that it doesn't contribute to a neighborhood feel, right? So it puts, again, the car as a more car-centric model of things. It says, where do we put our car? Okay, then where do we put our people, right? And so I think we need to reverse that. Where do we give people livable spaces? And in Stefan's presentation, you can see even in the densest version, the one that he had in Kahului, people had front porches. People had a place to interact with each other, kind of like Councilmember Hodgins mentioned. Like there was a place for people to be people outside of their cars. The other thing I want to mention is you said at scale, that this often works at scale, and Mr. Crowley brought up that similar comment. But there's a movement across the country right now called the Incremental Development Alliance. These are people that have said, we're going to take these small lots and one at a time, we're going to redevelop them and we're going to make them and apply this missing middle model. And I encourage the council, I'm taking a group of folks from the planning department to the Congress for New Urbanism, where Incremental Development Alliance has a great big showing. They train people how to do this incremental development, how to do these one at a time projects and make the most of the money they have and all of that. So it can be done at multiple levels. And I just, yeah.
Chair, since we have one round of questions, what do they do with the cars?
In these projects. So in the pictures that were shown, that Stefan showed, they have parking. So they do have some, in that one that was in South Kihei area, or I'm not sure what part of Kihei it was, but in Kihei, there was a garage under the second ADU on the back, and then there was parking on the back. So what they're just doing is reorienting the lot so that it's more organized that way.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair. That's it.
Member Johnson?
Thank you, Chair. And so, Director, I appreciate your responses. I just want to ask a couple follow-up questions. Can you tell me some of the lessons you folks learned about Kauai and what they're doing? It seems to me that you went to Kauai. I'd like to hear how what could we cherry pick from them?
Mahalo. So while I was getting your question, Stefan said, I need the call-in number. So I apologize if I can have 1 second to give him that number. That would be really great.
For anyone watching online, it is 1-808-977-4067, and the code is 607-929-65#.
Okay, that was really helpful. Thank you, Chair. So to answer your question, we have not yet been to Kauai, but we did pick Opticos Design. And so we haven't been yet. We're going in April, end of April. We're going to be talking about our zoning code with them. We're also going to be talking about their very successful Lima Ola project, which was a project that where they basically entitled the land and then RFP'd out the vertical for affordable housing. So we're going to go talk with them a little bit about that. But they've been, Opticos has been doing their community plans. They did West Kauai and South Kauai community plans. And within that, they incorporated these principles. They're also doing a transit-oriented development around the government center at Rice Street. And so, they're doing all kinds of things there. One of the things I'll stop.
Well, I was just going to say that after the visit, maybe we can get a letter from you and tell us what else you learned.
Certainly.
My next question's in regards to the pre-approved plans that we've had in I assume it's in planning department. Do we have those pre-approved plans that are for missing middle?
So thank you for your question. I think the pre-approved plans would go through Department of Public Works for the building permit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We would only review them for compliance with zoning.
Oh, okay. All right. So that's just something I thought would be really interesting for our community, that if we did have pre-approved missing middle plans, and that might help with a lot of this. I think my last question, and I didn't hear the bell, Chair, let me know if it went, but in regards to the parking, it seems that we're going to get stuck on this a lot. I think the idea of parking, and we have the free fare bus pass, where since that's been enacted, since post-fire, I should say, for 500,000 people have rode the bus. So I think there are people, obviously 500,000 of them, who will take the bus. It's a small investment for the county if we start covering those bus passes for everyone, and just kind of really bolster up our bus system or any type of multimodal transportation, because if we can pull 500,000 people off the roads and put them on a bus, that kind of really does change the way people are traveling. So
Member
I heard my
Johnson,
time.
were you able to hear the bell?
Yeah, I heard that one. So
Okay.
I guess I'll wait for second round unless she wants to do a one-word answer. I don't know, but I can hold
Oh,
on.
no, I just was checking if you could hear the bell. Did you have an answer for him?
I have a small thing to add, if I may. That's
Okay.
an answer for him. In addition to buses, thinking about connectivity of sidewalks and bike facilities as well. I live just down the street here by Wailuku School, and I know people who get in their car to go up to the school that's above us, Pu'ukukui, that live in my neighborhood, right next door to that, because there isn't a safe way for people to walk to school. So those are things to be thinking
Yeah.
about as well.
Yeah, and
So it's a yes and. We need all the things.
and I'll take my prerogative as chair that I've been speaking with the Office of Recovery because they are talking about having a third-party vendor enforce against on-street parking when the street widths are less than 28 feet. And my comment was, that's only the stick. Where's the carrot? Our transportation is not made for our West Maui residents, given that many of them work nights and the bus doesn't run past 9 to 2 in the morning, or our hotel workers that work as maids sometimes start as early as 4 in the morning. And so, you know, it is a comprehensive thing. I watched the South Maui Town Hall. Director Molina had to apologize to Mr. Moran about his sidewalks that he still doesn't have. And so, you know, I know a lot of people talk about where is the infrastructure first. Where's our sidewalks? Where's our buses that fit our communities? Because, you know, in the resort areas, a lot of people work nights or very early mornings, and our public transportation isn't built for those residents yet. So I think one of the biggest complaints I hear is infrastructure first, and I hear that a lot from South Maui. But just taking my prerogative to make a comment to your question as well. Next up,
Yeah, I totally
Member
agree, Chair.
Kama, did you have any questions?
I did share, thank you so very much. Early on when Captain Boss was on, he said that he really supported this because at least for the Lahaina area, they would have protections in terms of what we're talking about. So I just wanted to ask him, are those same protections available to people outside of the Lahaina area? And is there an additional cost for them? Because they would have to probably put more effort into
I'll
the
let him answer, but I think he was referring to multifamily housing has these additional protections. But Captain Voss, did you hear the question?
Yes, I did. I got the question, and Chair Polton, you're correct in that I was referring to the multifamily. Once you get the 3 dwellings in one unit, or rather 3 units in one dwelling, you trigger a lot of the inherent protection systems that are already in the building code. It's not site specific. It's not anything to do with the jurisdiction. And yes, the infrastructure will have to be there. So that still has to be in place. It's just possibly a more cost-efficient way to build one structure with 4 dwellings as opposed to 4 separate dwellings, and then it comes with the added fire protection per fire code and building code. And zoning also plays a role in what their setbacks will be for those type of structures. So all the parts are there without having to amend anything else to provide more density. It's something we can introduce without really changing any existing laws, as far as my perspective.
It's wonderful, wonderful, thank you. So, Chair,
Yeah, and I just wanted to let you know Stefan is back online via phone, and if anyone has questions for him, he can press star